Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Kathy Mackechney from Denver in Colorado. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. So me too. I'm delighted you're here. I've been doing lots of solo podcasts for the last week or so. So now it's not just listeners. You've got a dialogue today, not just Simon's monologue. So hopefully that'll be more interesting for you. Now, Kathy and I spoke a couple of weeks ago, and we've spoken obviously now just before we started recording. And I asked her a question, and her response got me really stoked. Kathy's 55, I'm 56. We don't know whether stoked is the right word or not, because Kathy used my favorite quote. This quote was the fact that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that just, it got me really stoked about looking at a conversation, because looking forward to our conversation, because listeners, I'm trying to go a little bit deeper, because I think that's where all the good stuff is buried. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. So, do you mind if I go back a little bit?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. So, you know that I'm an IFS, internal family systems therapist. And when I discovered that model, when I discovered it for myself,
yeah.
It was at a point in my career as a therapist where I was thinking about what else I wanted to get trained in. So my training is as a social worker and as a couple and family therapist. So I have this family systems orientation, and I was thinking about what else I wanted to, add to my toolbox, so to speak. And I had considered EMDR, but I wasn't totally psyched about that. I had experienced EMDR myself as a client, and while I found it very helpful, it, for me, didn't, although it lasted for a long time, it didn't have permanent, lasting results. And besides, everybody else was doing that, and I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing, was getting trained in. And I thought about getting trained in DBT because, DBT has the strong mindfulness component, dialectical behavior therapy, but I wasn't totally psyched about that either. And then I went to this one-day conference where Richard Schwartz, the founder of IFS, spoke. And after I listened to him for probably a few minutes, I thought, this is it. This is my model. And it resonated with me so much because I was really looking for something that combined my spiritual background. I'm Buddhist, and so I have a daily meditation practice, and I was looking for something that could combine the personal or the spiritual and the professional for me, my professional training as a family systems therapist and my spiritual orientation. And for me, IFS does that. And it's why IFS has been called a psychosocial spiritual model, because it does have this strong mindfulness component, but it's more than that. And I even hesitate to use the word mindfulness because I think that is overused currently, and it has really lost its meaning. But for me, and I think for many of us in the IFS community, there is a spiritual aspect of it. And that's what self with the capital S is. And that's the internal attachment figure that is the healing entity that we are helping parts of us get to know and connect with.
Yeah. So if I heard Dick Schwartz, on a podcast talking about his book, and the book title says it all, right? So if this is all being a bit heady to your listeners, the title says it all, right? There are no bad parts.
That's right.
No bad parts.
That's right.
There's different aspects of who you are, and none of them are bad.
That's right. That's right.
All of them are good.
They all have positive intent, and they get stuck in these roles that they take on when some event happens, some trauma happens, and they are trying to figure out what to do, and they come up with their best solution at the time. And remember, these traumas often happen when we're young, and so these parts of us are young. They're doing their best, right? I mean, they are kids doing their best in a difficult situation. And so they think of the first thing they can think of to do, and they take on that role and start doing that. And whether that leads to bad outcomes, bad results, is immaterial. The intent of the role, of what they start doing, is positive. It's to try to get us out of what is happening, or get us through it, or help us survive it in whatever way works. So the intent is positive, and that's what we mean when we say there are no bad parts. These aren't bad parts. These are good parts. They're all good. They all have positive intent, but they get stuck in these roles doing these things that can have very bad outcomes. And these can lead to very bad behaviors, but these are parts doing the best that they can.
Yeah. So this is our identity, parts of our identity, driving our thoughts, driving our feelings, driving our behavior. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're most of us look at our behavior and we don't go far enough back. We don't go to identity. We don't, because we're adoptees. You're talking to Simon Jonathan Ben, but I was David Anthony Flower for a while, So identity is mixed up. Transracial adoptees, identity is mixed up. So once we get clarity on identity, then that's going to drive our thoughts, that's going to drive our feelings, that's going to drive our behavior. That's kind of like a model. Do you, please, how do you see that? How do you see the connection between identity and behavior?
I would say that these parts are really, they're just reacting. They're reacting to whatever is happening. And so, my parts are reacting to things that my husband does and says, or doesn't do and doesn't say, as though that same thing that happened all those years ago is happening again. As though, oh my gosh, maybe he's going to leave too. So they're just reacting. And so they make a quick assessment. Usually it's emotion that drives the reaction, right? Some strong emotion from that time comes up, and then they make me do what they do. And so with IFS, we slow that process down so we can get to know the part and come to understand what its experience was. And we do that by creating this self with the capital S to part relationship. And self is it's our essence. It's hard to describe, it's hard to put into words, but we believe that we are all born with self energy. So this is what makes IFS a psychosocial spiritual model. We all are born with this self energy. And self is it's contained within us, and it transcends the limits of our bodies and connects us with everything else in the universe.
Yeah. So because it's hard to explain this stuff, because it's not a thing, right? So sorry, I'm going to just back up a bit. Kathy's a Buddhist. I don't have a religion. I'm looking at this from a non-religious spiritual perspective. So I'm self-identifying here as consciousness or as awareness, and this is I think, is this a Buddhist one where we talk about the fact that we're the sky, not the clouds. Is that a Buddhist thing? So the
I think
sky
there are different lineages.
Okay, right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're differentiating who we are from how we feel. We're differentiating. This is me, right? I'm differentiating between who I am, identity, and the trauma that I feel. I'm separating our spiritual essence from my behavior and my trauma.
Yes, yes. And that's one of the things we do with IFS is we differentiate between self, which is what you're describing as who I am.
Yeah.
And parts.
Okay. So can I give you another metaphor that comes to my head? Have you ever played Trivial Pursuits?
Yes, it's been a while, but yes.
Wow, yeah. So you remember the little there's the what's it, the little plastic round part that we've each got a different color, and it's a little plastic holder, and then when we get the answer for, when we get the answer for sport, I think it's brown or it's pink, yellow, something, we get the little bit of cheese and we put it in.
Yes.
We put it in the little disc thing.
Yes.
So that was the metaphor that came to my mind in terms of the self is the repository, right? It's the cheese holder, and the parts are the cheeses, right?
Yeah, I think that works. Yep.
I'm glad. and there's no smelly French cheese, right? There's no French. Yeah,
that's right, because there's no bad cheese.
There's no bad cheese. Yeah, it's not. It never goes off, right? This is metaphorical cheese, right? We're talking about a metaphor, and every metaphor has its limitations. So there will be limitations but we can't point at. Yeah, we need the metaphors because what we're talking about isn't a thing, and our brains can only grasp something that is a thing. Yeah.
Would it be okay if I told you a story about? Okay. So I think this is a good illustration for me of how I guess psychology and spirit, which is what we were talking about before you started recording, psychology and spirituality combine, and just how I view things and the spiritual aspect, without which I could not have experienced the healing that I've experienced. So this is a story about some psychedelic assisted healing that I very recently experienced. So I started psychedelic assisted therapy a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I started with psilocybin and had one in particular profound journey with that. And fast forward to several weeks ago, the beginning of September, And I had gone on my first ayahuasca retreat in December of last year. And in that experience, I had a very strong sense of my belly the whole time. And I thought at the time it was largely because I felt nauseous, as one can with the ayahuasca. But I also had this sense that it felt like I was pregnant with me, with baby me. So there's a little bit of IFS perspective there. The baby part of me, that baby who was relinquished, I felt like I was pregnant with baby me. And I had a sense then that I should come back and do another retreat in 9 months. So that would have been August. And as it turns out, that retreat was full, but there was an opening still in the retreat, Labor Day weekend here in the United States, Labor Day weekend. And I thought, well, that seems pretty perfect that it would be Labor Day.
Yeah.
So I came back. I went back for my second retreat at the beginning of September, Labor Day weekend. And it was a 2-night retreat this time. The first time it was a 1-night retreat. And the first night was, I'll just say, kind of uneventful. And then the second night was profound. And I experienced a lot of suffering. I was purging on and off for hours, literally. It was intense. There was a lot.
Purging physically or purging?
Purging physically, yeah, which can happen with ayahuasca. And my guide said is something that, we want to have happen. We are there to let go of some stuff. So there was a lot of purging, and it was tough. And at some point, after literally hours of that, I was lying there on my mat, and I had an image of being handed that baby. That baby me was being handed to me.
Wow.
And from an IFS perspective, we would say that baby part was being handed to self. And for the first time that evening, I felt myself like smile a little bit. And this was a joyous moment. And so fast forward, and the next morning we were sharing our experiences, our group. And I told everyone what had happened. And I said, I feel like a sleep-deprived new mom who labored hard. And now I've got that baby with me. And so it was really profound. And then a few nights later, so there was a third night of the retreat that I didn't do because I wanted to go home and have the rest of that day at home and then have the next day, Labor Day, off before I returned to work. But a few nights later, there was this regularly scheduled meeting of this group here in Denver that people go to, people who are interested in psychedelic assisted therapy and who may be, participants in it or practitioners of it. And there was a speaker that evening, and he was a speaker on he was talking about ancestral healing, ancestral work. And so he led us through this experiential exercise where we paired up with someone and took turns embodying each other's ancestor, an ancestor that each of us chose. So I had this partner, and I had thought I was going to work with an ancestor on my paternal biological side of the family. And then kind of at the last minute, I decided, nope, I want to work with my maternal biological grandmother, my birth mom's mom. And so my partner, your partner in the exercise, embodies this ancestor, and they start turned away from you. And then you tell them if you want them to turn around and how close you want them to get to you and things like that. So I had him turn around and he had his eyes closed, which was helpful. And he was representing my grandmother. And this is the person who told my birth mom told me this after I met her, you will not come home with that baby, right? Which was a common message back then in 1968 when I was born, right? It was a common message for unmarried women who were pregnant. Their mothers often said, in essence, you're not coming back with that baby. Hence the book, The Girls Who Went Away. So I've always held that in my head, that she said, you will not come home with that baby. And so in this exercise, with my partner embodying my grandmother, I said to her, I'm that baby. That's me. And I said, and that baby is with me now. And so this was my sense of it, right? So this is spiritual for me. She kind of had her head down and she said, this is, all happening in my head, right? She said, I'm sorry. And I said, I forgive you. And I said, I have to forgive you because I don't want that energy in this baby anymore. And I said, maybe you can be part of her life. And she kind of lit up and she said, I could help with her. And I said, that'd be great. I could use help. I could use help. And so the exercise wrapped up. We talked about it. I talked to a few people and then left. And then after I got in my car and I started, to drive home, I was pulling out of the parking lot and I was listening to one of my Pandora stations, and this like upbeat song came on. And I had a sense that baby me, was in a car seat behind me. And my grandmother was in the back seat sitting next to her. And that song came on and my grandmother loved it. And she started like kind of dancing and moving to the music. And she was like sort of singing to the baby and right, entertaining the baby the way we do with babies, sort of like dancing with her. And the baby was smiling and loving it. And I was just driving us home. And I thought, this is wild. And you can't make this stuff up. And for me, if that is not a spiritual experience or doesn't involve an aspect of the spiritual, I don't know what does.
Yeah. So all that activity led to you said to your mum's mum, I have to forgive you because I don't want the other energy in me anymore.
I didn't want that shame, that she passed on to my birth mom, that got passed on to me in utero, baby me. I didn't want that in this baby part of me, right, anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what had transpired is, that baby was given to me now. And I had to forgive my in order, to stop the cycle of shame being passed on.
So it was, we've heard of near-death experience. This is a spontaneous forgiveness experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also makes me flash on all the purging I did. And, that was real tangible. And I'm sure some of what was getting purged was shame. It was what came to me at the beginning of that night was I matter. And that had come to me previously during that psilocybin journey a few years ago. But this was like part 2 of that. And it felt like I was purging everything in me that was against I matter. Everything in me, like against mattering, was getting purged, and shame would be included in that.
So it's profound, it's deep, it's spontaneous, and yet, somebody said this. I heard some say this. There's no need. Yeah, we don't have to seek. What is this? But only seekers find. Right. Mm-hmm. So you put yourself. You put yourself in the space, hanging up. You're hanging out at the bus stop for insights. And then eventually there's this spontaneous forgiveness.
Yeah.
Experience.
And I imagine that may sound pretty woo-woo to some people. And Richard Schwartz, he downplayed the spiritual aspect of IFS for a long time while he was trying to earn that model's the credibility that it deserved, in the broader psychological, psychiatric, community.
So I know I have come across a lot of traditionally trained psychologists, psychiatrists. I've come across their work as they have moved from the purely psychological space to a combination space that you're talking about here. And they did that because what they found was that the psychological stuff didn't work for them. And
it's not enough. That's how I would say it. It's just not enough. It misses something. It leaves out something.
So that kind of begs the question: what does it leave?
It leaves out the woo-woo. If you want to refer to it that way, but the spiritual, which is hard to put into words, right? And that's what we are always trying to do in psychology and with psychology, is put things into words. But look at what's happening. There's been all this growth and interest in more somatic practices, right? The body keeps the score, and that resonates with people, and IFS has that component too. So obviously what we've been doing, or what's been most prominent or dominant, has left out this other piece that people intuitively know that they need, know that they're, they hear about it and it clicks.
Yeah. So if we, the reason it resonates is because it, resonation, we're talking about energy, we're talking about body, and we're talking at the, I don't know why I'm feeling to defend the woo-woo or just explain it, give people a different way through it. So what we're talking about here could be as simple as, like you go into a good party, right? and you go into a wake, right? You go into a wake after a funeral of somebody that's died young, right? So we can feel the energy in the good party, and we know it's going to be we know that's the difference. We know the difference between a good party and the wake of a funeral that's died, somebody died too young. Or we could even say two wakes. So one is the wake of a 98-year-old woman, and one is the wake of a 8-year-old child. You know, the 90-year-old woman, it's got a whole different energy about it. That's why I guess we're using, is that why you're using the word resonate? Because it's about what we feel in our bodies. It's beyond one, and it's both, isn't it? That's the paradox. It's within form and without form.
Yes.
So this is about putting ourselves in the space for these profound shifts to happen, and the profound shift to me is kind of it's all encapsulated in the quote. So spiritual beings having a human experience, and I've changed this now, right? It's because so that often people say it's the spiritual being having 8 billion human experiences, right? So 8 billion people in the world or whatever. And the way I see it is it's spiritual being having, all as adoptees, or one spiritual being having 5 million adoptees experiences, just a guesstimate of how many people there are in the Western world who are adopted, right? It's separating who we are from our experience of life. We're separating the psychological might be looking at our thoughts and our feelings. The spiritual is looking at the essence of who we are, and that's kind of how it makes sense in my. It's a bit left brainy. It's a little bit rational, over rational, perhaps for some. I don't know. How would you see that? It's the distinction between.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm just thinking about how I would say it. I don't disagree with your frame of it at all. You know, these I'm trying to think of what you just said that
people say. Let me give you an answer, because let me give you a question, because I haven't really come up with the answer to this. So I'm drawing a separation between. I'm saying we're not our trauma.
Right. That's right.
What I'm saying. And people are telling me that that's traumatizing. People are telling me that what I'm saying could be traumatizing. It could be traumatizing for others. Interestingly, they're not
saying it. We are not our trauma. Saying to someone, "You are not your trauma."
I'm not saying to anybody we are not our trauma. I'm putting a post. I wouldn't say to you I would, because we're therapists and we're adoptees, and we got. But I don't. If somebdy says I go to an adoptee event, say I meet somebody next to the coffee stand, and I ask them if they want any sugar, do you want any milk, do you want any cream or sugar? And then I hand them a cup of coffee, and I wouldn't say to them, oh, by the way, you're not your trauma. I'm sowing. I think I'm sowing a seed there. I'm because the most healing thing for me has been to separate who I am from
what happened.
From what happened, and from how I feel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with that completely. We are not our trauma. We were traumatized, and there are parts of us that hold that trauma,
Okay.
that were traumatized. And then we need self, that, our essence, that spiritual being that, within all of us. We need self to create attachment between these parts and self to help them heal from what happened to them from having been traumatized. And, this also reminds me of why I'm very deliberate about saying that I was adopted, not I am adopted, which makes it like this permanent state of being. And I am an adoptee. I am. And that is also one aspect of my identity. It's not the whole of me, although it has often felt that way, or, for a long time in my life, it felt that way. And it feels less that way now with the healing that I've done. Thanks, largely to the incorporation of some spirituality into my healing work. So we were adopted. That was an event that happened that was traumatized. Well, first we were relinquished, which is why I often refer to us as relinquishees or relinquishee hyphen adoptees. So we were adopted and we are adoptees as a dominant part of our identities, but not the sum of who we are.
So when we spoke last time, you said not all parts get adopted.
Right.
So could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. So one day that just popped into my head. I was literally walking through my house and it came to me, not all parts get adopted. And I thought, yeah, I just kind of nodded my head and it was like, yep. There was that knowing that that's a truth. Not all parts of us get adopted. And I started sharing that with people, and it would resonate with other adoptees. It resonated with people who were not adopted, but who, I'll say, get it, And then I realized, oh, I think I need to like expound on this, because people are like, yeah, tell me more. And I'm like, that's it. That's all you need to know right there. There it is. Not all parts get adopted. But as I started exploring it, I discovered it's because there are parts of us that, even then when we were babies, didn't want to get adopted. They didn't want to go along with it. And so they didn't. They stayed where they were. Like they stayed connected to birthmom. They stayed in that hospital. They stayed in that country. They stayed where they were. Or they didn't get adopted because the adoptive parents didn't adopt those parts of their child, because maybe those parts reminded the adoptive parents of some things about the birth parents that the adoptive parents didn't like or that felt threatening to them. And so when they adopted their child, they didn't adopt all parts of them, all aspects of them. And there are other reasons that some parts, not all parts, get adopted. And as I continued to explore it, I discovered, actually, these parts can be, as Dick says, some of the juiciest parts of ourselves, because they weren't burdened by the experiences of relinquishment and adoption. So some of these parts that didn't get adopted are free. They didn't take on the roles that some other parts took on, and they didn't get burdened by relinquishment and adoption. And they hold valuable information about who we really are, like who we were born, who we are inherently, what we most love, our greatest passions, what we most want to do. And so it can be very valuable in freeing and healing to connect with these parts and like invite them into the mix, so to speak, and reestablish our connection to them and allow them to give us the gifts that they hold that, you know, have been cut off as a result of adoption and what gets cut off in adoption, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So can I try one out for you? I'm thinking about my birth mother. So she was into swimming, right? My dad was into swimming. My adopted dad was into swimming, and I'm into swimming, right? Because my dad taught me, right? My birth mother was into hiking and you know, like going to the hills and the mountains, right? And my dad wasn't. My mum wasn't either. My adopted mum, my adopted. And when I first started going in with the scouts, I didn't like it either. I just wanted to walk along there. I just wanted to walk along the flat bits, you know, like I couldn't see any need to go up or down, right? But now nature hills blow me away now. And you know, the one picture that I've got 2 or 3 pictures of my birth mother from her brother, so my birth uncle, from who he emigrated to Hong Kong and then to Canada. But that's not by the by. I don't know why I mentioned that. But I love the mountains. I love the views from mountains, and I love in Scotland last year where the mountains kind of tumble into the loch. It was just breathtaking. And one of the pictures of my birth mum is her sitting by a lake in the Lake District, I think, which is like a mountainous area. So is that kind of what would that be a part? That seems to me to be like a part that wasn't adopted.
So it could be, and what I always tell people is go with it. Whatever comes to you when I say that and talk about it a little bit, go with it. So in IFS, we call that a trailhead, and we would follow that trailhead and find out more, but trust what comes. So if you're getting a sense that, oh, I think this might be a part of me that didn't get adopted, go with it. And then, you know, through in the workshops that I lead, the Not All Parts Get Adopted workshops that I lead, this is the kind of thing you have an opportunity to do, you know, with me as a guide, to explore that and find, you know, so follow that, what you're describing, you know, this connection to nature, and find out where it leads, the part to which it leads. And then you'll find out more. And that part will be able to tell you, yeah, like basically yay or nay. Yeah, I am a part that didn't get adopted. Or no, I did, but, you know, but I still have this, you'd find out.
I guess I'm giving the example for my own benefit, but also for their
Yes.
for the listeners, to give them an example. I'm big on examples rather than theory. And there's another one. So my dad was in publishing, and in publishing, it really, you know, you're gonna spend money getting stuff printed, so you've got to make sure that it's right, and it's the proofreading and the whole thing is like, it takes forever. With the podcast, I went into that business. So for 20 years, that's what I did. You know, we would proofread, you know, edit, brief the writer. Oh, the text not right, and he hasn't got the brief. Oh no, the client doesn't like it. Oh no, the spelling's wrong, and you know, like the whole thing. It's like it would take forever, right? So with the podcast, you asked me, can I, if you cough, can I edit it? And I say no, because I don't know how to do it, right? And neither I have the patience to learn to do it, but mainly because it's just about freedom. I can say things. I can, you know, like I can say things. I can apologize. I can blub on. But there's a freedom with that, and a strange story pops into my head with that, about, you know, like what's important in anything thing that we're hearing. So the workshops that I went to on consciousness with two incredible speakers, well, one incredible speaker, and then his partner would do some speaking. He was too far out for me to take anybody that I knew to that thing. It would have been too way out for me to take him as a guest. But then I met this guy, and I met this guy at a business networking thing, and I thought he was in the same space. So I took him to this event, and we spent the day there. And this guy, Richard, this speaker, is dropping some truth bombs, really big stuff, right? And at the end of the day, I said to this guy, I think he was called Richard, said, "What did you make of that?" Expecting him to say, "I didn't get it," or "That's profound," or "Hasn't." And all he could do was, all he said was, "Well, I'm a public speaker too," and the speaker kept on walking in front of the projector. That was it. He all he could do, because whatever this guy said, which is incredible, has incredible depth and profundity and truth to it, instead of tackling the content, all he could do was talk about the fact that the guy wandered around on stage and sometimes got in front of the projector. And I just thought, you've missed the whole thing. You've missed the whole thing. You've wasted the day. If that's all you've got is to pick holes in the guys standing in front of the projector, I just thought that I shouldn't have brought you, mate. You just, I thought you were ready, but you weren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not all parts get adopted. So how would that work with the Trivial Pursuit circle thing? Yeah, some of the cheeses stay in the box.
There's still, so all of our parts are part of us and always are. But with parts that didn't get adopted, even though they are still connected to us, so they're still, in that box, so to speak, they can feel further away. So they can be parts of us of which we are unaware. It's like, oh, I didn't know there was this cheese in the box too.
Right. So this is kind of the subconscious becoming conscious, is it? Is that what you're talking? We are part of the subconscious. We haven't been aware of it.
Right. Yeah.
And then it pops into awareness. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. As like it can be a happy surprise.
Yeah. Well, like the podcasting stuff, the freedom with the podcasting, it's a happy surprise after being brought up in a world that was all about getting things right and making sure that no money was wasted because we had to reprint some stuff. Yeah, there was lots of discipline and the freedom. The other thing that's popping into my head as we talk, Kathy, is this. You talked last time about a shift. I wrote down cognitives on my notes here, but you talked about the shift between, I think, did you say the word cognitive understanding and felt experience? So words like that. So
I'm not remembering.
Yeah. So I talk about like the difference between an idea or a neat concept or a bumper sticker, right? Or a fully blown epiphany moment, something that we get in our bones.
Okay, yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. What just came to me is, again, my own experience of what you're talking about in essence is the difference between, for many years, knowing in my head, I'm pointing to my forehead right now as I'm talking about this, I matter, right? Like, and trying to believe that, right? It's like an affirmation,
Yeah.
that that um people might write on their mirrors or whatever,
Mhm.
right? I matter. Just practice saying that enough, and um
You will
it'll
get.
help. Right, right. But so I knew in my head that I mattered. Like, I knew it cognitively, I knew it intellectually, like, yes, of course I matter, from a rational perspective. Right. I get that all people matter equally. Everybody, is born mattering. I understand that cognitively. But that is a very different experience than what I went through to embody that knowing and the embodied sense of it I have now. After all that purging, I mean, after the first, by comparison, pretty minor bit of suffering I experienced in my psilocybin journey, and then the more extensive suffering, physical, physiological suffering I experienced in that on that ayahuasca retreat, now in an embodied way, you know, after all of that and getting that baby handed to me, I feel in my body the experience of I matter. That's a very different experience, feeling it throughout my whole body, like knowing that on a deep level in an embodied way, right? I mean, I wind up just saying the same word over and over again, embodied, 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 because again, our language is limited and we really lack the words, the vocabulary to describe this, because it is body based. It does tap into the spiritual and what connects us to all other beings. And that's very different from just knowing in my head rationally that I matter.
So the story that pops into my head to sum that up is a one from a mentor of mine, a coach of mine. He says it's the difference between thinking a joke's funny and laughing at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's great. I
yeah,
love that.
laughing at the joke
Mm.
is the embodied experience.
Yes.
Saying that's funny is the cognitive idea or whatever, or the theory.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between theory and practice.
Yes.
So who said this? Something like yeah, I don't know who said this. The menu is not the food.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of ropey restaurants, where they put the picture of in tourist areas where us Brits sometimes go in Spain and Greece, where they put a picture. They put a picture of the food, and like, no, I don't want to go to that restaurant. That's that. We don't want that. So I'm conscious of time, Kathy. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about?
There's nothing else that comes to mind right now. It'll probably pop into my head as soon as you stop recording.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll do this again, right?
I'd love to.
And yeah, I'm just thinking about this embodied versus cognitive stuff. So if you look at what I'm trying to do with my social, it is ask some questions that let in the potential of a new idea for people to marinate on, right? Like you were saying, with the part, if you're thinking about the parts work that are left behind, go with what feels. Go with what feels, because it starts in this stuff starts in the head. Sometimes it's a fully blown experience, but sometimes does what's your experience? Some of it starts in the head, sometimes it's a full, is it an embodied experience, just boom, it's all there?
I think it is a mix, at least in my experience. That's what it's been. It's a combination. And sometimes for me, I've been experiencing this more lately as I have been listening to many of the wise indigenous people, who know way more about plant medicine than I think, any of us in the Western world could really ever learn about it. But, know it in this different way. And sometimes when I have been listening to them lately, what I notice happening is there's something about it that it is just intuitively making sense, but I'm not really understanding the words that they're saying. I'm not necessarily understanding the ways in which they're putting the words together and describing things. And I'm kind of like, I'm like listening, working hard in my head to get it right in this very Western way, right, to understand it cognitively, rationally. And I don't, or, I kind of do. I understand what some of those words mean, but the way they put them all together, I'm like, uh-huh, but it's getting in, it's getting into my body, and it's resonating. So there's that, but sometimes it comes to me first cognitively, and then I later, like I was describing, I matter, that came to me first cognitively, and then later in this embodied way. I just think it's a combination. And you go with whatever happens and whatever works for you, however it comes to you, go with it, and then it may expand and grow from there.
Yeah, cool. And the thing you said about running some workshops, presumably they're all in person, are those workshops? So
They are not. They are online, actually.
Okay.
My dream and plan is to turn this workshop, which right now is a like 3.5 hour workshop, online. The next one of which will be in November for, in the United States anyway, National Adoption Awareness, or Be-Awareness Month. But my dream is to expand this workshop into a retreat for adoptees, because I've discovered that what we really need are a few days to explore these different parts of ourselves, because there can be several. And ultimately, I would like to expand it further with other offerings as well. So
yeah,
that's
brilliant. So what time do you start in November, when you do the event in November? It's going to be evening your time, is it?
It will be, yep, it'll be my time, and it will start at 9 Mountain Time, I think. And I'm planning on November 11th for the next one.
Okay. So the listeners there, we're recording this in on October 4th, 2023. So if if this workshop sounds like it's great, then there's links to Kathy's website in the show notes. 9 o'clock, 9 a.m.
9 a.m. Mountain Time.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully I'll be able to make it then.
Yay.
Thank you.
And people can email me if they're interested, because I don't have anything on my website about it right now, but people can email me and
contact you through the website. Brilliant.
Yep.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
We'll speak to you very soon. Take care. Bye.